All right. Okay. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to get recording. I like to start on time to keep everyone's time protected. So today we're going to be talking about farming fallacies and the 10 most common farming myths. And the thing with real estate is we have a lot of myths that show up, and we're going to bust some of them specifically around geographic farming, but a lot of these show up in real estate as a whole and not just farming. So I want to go through those, answer any questions you have at the end, and then we'll get started. So I'm going to let everyone through. So just keep letting people come in. Okay, so start with who I am. I'm Ryan Smith. I am the creator of the Launch Your Farm show. I run a weekly online show and podcast about geographic farming. So I interview agents and professionals all across North America who really crush it in their farm and do it in different ways. And I've been doing this for just over a year now, and it's something I'm very passionate about because I like to help other agents grow their farm. I also run some training programs and some courses as well. In the past, I've ran a successful farm with my business partner, which helped kind of roll me into what I'm doing now, which is the speaking and the training and the coaching. And I really am passionate about that because I want to help other agents really figure out and crack the nut on success when it comes to geographic farming. So I am a licensed agent. I've been in the business over 13 years. I still have my license, but I don't do a lot of real estate. I focus mostly on my training and coaching. I was a past host of the Niche Agent. So I used to run that about 7 years ago. So you may have seen that show. It was a podcast and a video show as well. And obviously I am a fan of geographic farming. Again, it's something I'm very passionate about. I think it's a great way to have agents to grow their business and really become successful with what they're doing. So be sure to stick around till the end. You'll find out how to get some of those extra bonuses. You may have got that in the email. We're going to be giving away some stuff for you as well. So make sure you stick around to the end for that. So as you go through this, I want you to think, what does farming mean to you? So for each person, farming has a different thing. And when they hear it, they resonate differently. They hear certain things, but there are some common things that come up. And there's a lot of things that we hear about farming, and agents think farming is one thing and sometimes it's not. And that's what we're going to bust. But before we start that, I want to share my belief that farming is the future of real estate. I truly believe that to really become successful in real estate, you need to take that hyper-local approach, and you need to learn to farm, whether that's geographic farming, sociographic farming, farming your database, farming your sphere, whatever that looks like for you. But I believe that farming in a geographic sense is really the future because technology is changing, social media is changing. If you look at Google and you look at Facebook and these tech giants, they're really pushing for hyper-local content, and real estate has changed. So it used to be hyper-local. And then when the internet came out, things started going broad. Agents were going all over and they were expanding their reach because they could. But now we're starting to see that people want that hyper-local, people want to have that local connection and that expertise. And that's why I really believe that farming is the future. And if we can tap into this, we can really have a strong potential to be successful down the road and have a great career with it. So I want to start with what farming isn't, because a lot of people think farming is something and don't know what it is or don't know what it isn't. As I mentioned at the beginning, each person is going to have their own ideas of what farming is. One of the common things that we hear is farming is postcards and door knock. And the reality is that isn't the truth. That is a way to do the business, but it's not the way to do the business. It's a strategy, but it's not what farming is. Farming comes from the analogy of like a real farm where you go out there and you plant your crops, you tend to your farm, you watch it grow, you reap your harvest, and then you repeat. So we take this analogy from actual farming and we use it in real estate. And again, as I mentioned, farming can be multiple things. It doesn't have to be just geographic farming, but it's the time and attention and energy into a group, putting that into your real estate career and spending it on your farm geographically, spending it on a farm sociographically, demographically, whatever that looks like for you. And you put your time and energy into it. Now, I specialize in geographic farming, and my definition is strategically focusing your expertise, marketing, and prospecting efforts in one specific geographic area to build a sustainable business and long-term relationships. So it's a long-winded answer to say you're spending your time and energy and resources in one area and becoming the go-to person. Now, again, a lot of agents have heard of farming in the past and maybe have done it themselves or are currently doing it. And that's generally what a lot of people see farming as. It's spending your time and energy. But like I said, some people have different views of what it is, what it isn't. But at the core, CPR is what I consider the core of farming. It's what I say you need to keep your farm alive. And what it stands for is community, positioning, and relationships. And what strategies you do or don't do doesn't matter. You still need at the core to have the community, positioning, and relationships. So the community is putting your community first. So it's finding that group, finding that group that you're focusing on, putting them first before the transaction. And a lot of agents have moved from doing community back to transactions. And now we want to see people move back to that community approach again, because it's going to help people stand out. It's going to help people provide value. It's going to help you grow in the community and have the community find you. The next is positioning. And the positioning comes in two different ways. There's becoming the expert and becoming the ambassador. And when you can learn to position yourself as that expert, it elevates your status, it elevates your trust, and it really elevates you in the community. And the same with ambassador. When you can become the ambassador for your community, you can build relationships, build trust with people, elevate your expertise, and elevate your reach in the community. And then that helps you build relationships. And those relationships is what it's all about. It's furthering relationships. It's either creating new relationships or strengthening the relationships you have. And what happens is when you do this correctly, you focus in the community, you learn to position yourself, you learn to build relationships, then it cycles back and you then have a subset. So you have a smaller group of people that are in your database or that you're following up with, and those become its own community. You learn to position yourself and become the ambassador for those people, and then you strengthen those relationships. So at the core, farming really needs to have the CPR in it to be successful. You can do all different types of strategies. You can do all different types of things to grow your farm. But if you don't have the CPR in place, you're not going to succeed at a high level. And the agents who understand this do really well with it. So why do you want to farm? There's a lot of reasons why you may want to farm. If you're not farming, you may have heard about it. You may have not heard about it. Obviously, you're here, you're interested somewhat in farming, but there's a lot of reasons why farming is so good. The first reason is it allows you to position yourself as that expert, like we talked about. And when you can become the expert, it makes your job a lot easier. It makes your job simpler because people want to work with you. They know who you are. They know what you're about. As a result, you're able to convert more leads, and you can convert more leads because people know who you are. They know what you're up to. They know what you're about. And as a result of that, you can lower your costs, which you can drive down your costs because you're able to convert more. You're able to get more business out of it. So it's much more efficient than traditional methods. You get a lot more come list me calls. The objections seem to start melting away, and it becomes easier to run your business. And it's more efficient because you don't have to drive 2 hours away to do a deal or do deals that you don't in areas you don't know or are not comfortable with, or in different real estate boards. It's also more efficient because people start coming to you rather than you having to keep constantly going out to them and try to find them. They start finding you because of the things you're doing in your farm to grow your database and to grow yourself. So it allows you to become that expert. It allows you to be more efficient, and it allows you to lower your costs. And as a result of that, you're able to build a much more sustainable business. And how we do that is using what I call the safety net model or the scope method. And what it does is you can layer in your strategies to make sure you're protected and make sure you're getting more business. And a perfect example is COVID. In the last year and a half, some people's businesses got completely wiped out on how they did their business. They may have been out door knocking and cold calling, and as a result, they couldn't do that. Or maybe technology changes or rules change. And if you're only relying on a few things, your business could completely change, and you have to make sure you're adapting. When you learn to apply the scope method, which is layering in your strategies and making sure you're focusing them in one area, you're able to create that safety net and also elevate your business and become more efficient with it. And lastly, it allows you to build a business around a community. And that's really what farming is about. And when you can learn to put the community first, you can get involved in different ways. You can have more fun with your business. You can enjoy what you're doing and really make an impact. And if you're just doing it from a transaction base, it's very difficult to stay on top. And it's also difficult to get all of the market share that you want, because you need to make sure you take the community into play when you're doing this, and make sure that you're serving them and they in return will serve you. So I want to start with, what is a myth? Each person has heard different things of what a myth is, what a myth isn't. Today, we're going to talk about some of those myths and we're going to bust them. But I want to explain what a myth is first, if you haven't heard of it. A myth is an unfounded or false notion. Our industry is riddled with myths, and we have so many myths, specifically in farming, but in all aspects of our business. We have various levels of expertise. We have misinformation. We have all these different things that are creating these myths within our business. And in farming, it's very prevalent to have a lot of these myths, and people pass these myths on. They misunderstand them. They create them themselves and they share them. And what happens is it's like a bad game of telephone where people pass on these myths and it gets passed on, and people don't actually look deeper into it and do a deep dive and say, is this really true? Is this really what's happening? What's going on? Some of these myths show up for different reasons. And the first reason why it shows up is fear. That is the number one most common reason why these myths show up. It's fear. There's a number of reasons why the fear affects that. You may have the fear of failure. That's one of the most common ones. So we get myths showing up because people are afraid of failing. So they don't do things, they avoid things, they tell lies to themselves, they hear it from other people, they hear things and then they misinterpret it because of that fear. There's also a fear of success. That's something I struggled with for a long time. It's the opposite of fear of failure, but it's actually in the same family of it, because you're afraid of, what if I actually do succeed? What if I actually go out and do this? What if this takes off and my farm actually goes and does really well? Now, what am I going to do? How am I going to keep up? Can I manage it? So we get a lot of people having these myths being passed on because of fear. There's also the fear of looking silly or not knowing what they're doing. And it creates these myths because people are afraid. As I mentioned, they're afraid of fear, they're afraid of failure, they're afraid of success, and all these reasons. So these myths are learned, some of them are taught, some of them are passed on, and some of them we don't even realize show up. And as a result, we end up getting misinformation. And because of this misinformation, we get a lot more myths showing up. Because people are afraid, they have these things showing up, they hear things and go, this doesn't work. This doesn't work for me. This didn't work. I heard from someone else that tried this. And you get this misinformation being passed on, again, like that bad game of telephone. And as a result, we get these myths because people are misinformed about what the truth is, or what the reality is, or what's possible or what's not possible. And we also have a lack of training. And this lack of training creates a lot of myths as well. This is part of the reason why I created this whole program, is I wanted to help agents really realize what farming can be and what it can be for them, and help train agents. Without the right training, you have these myths showing up because you don't know what's going on. You hear misinformation, you're afraid, and the lack of training stops people from figuring out the truth. If you have good training, you can help bust a lot of these myths. And obviously you're here, so you want to learn how we can do that and bust some of those myths. And also we get a lack of experience. Farming has changed. Farming strategies have changed over the years. And as a result, we get people who have never tried farming before. We get people who have tried it but haven't done it effectively. We have agents who have dabbled in it and don't have the experience. So because they don't have that experience, they're not able to teach themselves the correct way to do it. Or when they do hear the misinformation and these myths, they then pass it on themselves and they keep it going down the line. So the lack of experience drives a lot of these myths because they don't know what they're doing and they've never done it before, or they've heard from people who've never done it before or haven't done it correctly as well. And lastly, we get a lot of these myths showing up because of out-of-date practices. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times people hear farming and they think of postcards and door knocking. And there's a lot of strategies that used to work okay, or never worked at all, and are still being taught. And there's strategies that are being taught, and there's techniques that are being taught, and there's mindsets that are being taught that just don't line up with where our market's at, where things are going. So we have to make sure we're busting these myths from the fear perspective all the way down to the out-of-date practices. Now you're here, so obviously you want to learn. Hopefully you maybe have heard some of these. We're going to bust some of these as we go through it. So keep an open mind as we go through, because I want you to think about what myths you've heard. Maybe you've heard them and didn't realize it. Maybe as I go through these next 10 myths, you may pop up and go, I didn't realize that. I actually taught this session a couple of weeks ago, and there was two ladies that joined on the session. She said they had taken training on farming before, and she said almost every single thing I showed as a myth, someone else had taught them that. So a lot of these myths you may not even realize are there. Hopefully it will help change that. And by the end of this, you'll rethink about what farming looks like and what it can be like for you. So keep that in mind as we go through and think about it. So who has farmed before? Drop it in the chat box. If you farmed before, let us know. If you haven't farmed before, let us know. And if you haven't farmed, or if you aren't farming, let me know what's stopped you. So put in the chat box, what's stopping you from farming if you've never farmed before. So as I mentioned, we're going to be busting these 10 myths. And we have to realize that farming has changed over the years. The core fundamentals have not changed. The CPR has not changed. It will never change. But the strategies that have changed, the technologies have changed, the rules have changed. And as a result of these, we're left with these out-of-date thinking, this misinformation, these bad business practices, and just a general lack of understanding of farming. So I'm going to bust some of these myths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these myths. I'm going to talk about what the myth is. I'm going to bust the myth. And then what I'll do at the end of it, we'll open it up for questions. So if you have them, keep your questions. We'll save them at the end. Hopefully I bust a lot of the myths you may have had, and hopefully you don't have any of these myths, and you've got a clear head on what to expect and what farming is all about. So I'm going to jump right in and go with myth number one. And that is that farming takes way too long to get results. I want to see instant business. We hear this all the time. People have been told and taught that farming takes 6 to 18 months before you should start seeing results. Some people tell you it's 2 years before you start seeing results. The truth is, Nothing in real estate is instant, no matter what you're doing, whether it's referrals, because you can't keep replicating it. You may get an instant referral now because someone says, I'm looking to make a move, but to continually build a business on that, it's not instant. Internet leads aren't instant. Cold calling's not instant. You may get some instant deals happening, but it's not instant. So we have to realize it's going to take time and energy and resources to grow a business. However, farming, there are strategies and techniques you can put in place to start to strategies that can see results. You to do them, you have to be willing to spend time, resources to do that, but it doesn't have to take that long to start seeing those results. Many agents have heard that and have never started too long. They're impatient. They don't have the budget or the time or the resource to do that, and they don't have to be. Now, if you start doing old school, or if you aren't willing to do the things that you need to do to really grow, yes, it can take a lot longer to see those results. And I can't guarantee you they're going to get the results quicker if you're not willing to put the time and the energy and resources into it. But it doesn't have to. So if you've thought about farming and that stopped you, I want you to bust that myth because it's not true. I recently did a boot camp with one of the sessions I was teaching, and it was the last one I was doing. And there was a new agent in the group. She had never done any deals before. She was brand new to the business, started following my strategies. Within 2 weeks, she got her first lead. And within 3 weeks, she had an offer on a property. So she got deals right away, started getting those results instantly. For myself, when I started in the business, or when I started farming, we started farming in September. And by January, we got our first deal. Then we got another deal in March, another deal in April, another deal in April, another deal in May, another deal in June. And it's the deals started coming in consistently and quickly because we learned to do the right things that sped up that process. So if you've heard it's going to take long, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. So hopefully I've busted that myth. Myth number 2 is farming costs way too much to get results, and I don't have a big budget. I hear this all the time. Agents tell me that they can't get into farming because it's going to cost them too much money. They've heard that you got to send out a lot of postcards and just keep sending out stuff week after week after week, and they don't have the budget to do that. The reality is farming can be done for next to nothing. It can be done for free, but it's going to cost you something. It's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you time, or it's going to cost you energy. So you have to get creative. If you don't have a budget, you're going to have to put the time in. As I mentioned, nothing's instant in this business. Nothing's free in this business. Nothing's free as far as money and time. You're going to have to be willing to do one or put in one or both to make sure you do that, and also the energy to do it. When we do this correctly, we can learn to invest the money properly so we start to see results. And for a lot of people, it can be expensive because they just throw their money out there and they don't really look at what works, what doesn't work. They're not marketing correctly. They're not doing the right strategies. They're not tracking their spending, and they throw a lot of money out there. And for a lot of people who have tried farming, absolutely it can be expensive because they don't see the results. But if you start to see results and you reinvest back into your business, you can start to see results at a very strong return. Again, I can tell you my own personal experience. We were making 21 times our return on money. So we were making money consistently. We were making money at a high level, and it wasn't that expensive. So it was worth spending the money to keep getting that return. So you have to be willing to, again, invest the money or the time, and you have to be willing to get the results. But again, it's not going to be instant. If you're waiting for it to drop $1,000 and hopefully you're going to get money tomorrow, it probably is going to happen. So you have to find the balance of how long will it take to see the results, doing the right things, and be willing to spend the time and money to do that. If you try farming, if you dabble in it, you're probably going to throw away your money. You're going to throw away your time as well, and you're not going to get much from it. So you can do it inexpensively. One of the things I suggest always is start small and scale up. One of my mantras is it's better to scale up than to scale back. So many agents fail because of that. So we have to be cognizant of that. And you can start with a small budget. Start small, and as you start getting deals, you can start funding your farm with your farm and keep it growing. So it doesn't have to cost you a lot of money. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what we want to do is learn to buy back our time, so that way we are spending more money, but we're not having to put as much time in to get the same results. Myth number 3 is I need to have sales in the area. No one knows who I am, and I can't farm until I sell a few homes first. Going back to those myths we've talked about, number 1 comes from fear. This is absolutely rooted in fear, and it's a fear of I'm not good enough, fear of I'm a failure, fear of people aren't going to like me, or that people aren't going to know who I am. And we have to bust that myth right away. The reality is, with the right approach and the right positioning, you can become an expert in your farm, in your neighborhood, before you've even sold a home. Again, going back to when I started my last farm, I was new to the area, never sold a home in that area. I relocated and never sold a home in that area before. And we learned to position ourselves as the experts right up front. We learned to brand ourselves correctly. We learned to get out there with the right strategies, and we're instantly able to get results. Not instantly. So we were able to get results very quickly and instantly build the credibility because we learned to position ourselves as that expert. Now, if you have sales, you can absolutely use those to your advantage, but you can be brand new, never sold a home in your life. You could be 18 years old, just licensed, never sold a home, and learn to position yourself. So if you stopped yourself from farming because you've heard that I have to get more sales, or if you're not confident enough that you need to get more sales, that people need to know who you are, you can be planning to start. You need to just get started. Like I said, if you have sales, obviously we can leverage that and take advantage of that and help speed up that process even more. But you've never had to have even sold a home, especially you've never had to have sold a home in that neighborhood, to start farming and to start seeing results from it. It just takes that right approach and the right mindset to do that. So if you wanted to farm and you've held off and you pushed it off because you thought, well, I've got to wait, don't do that. That myth is so not true. You're the only one that's creating that myth in your head. You're telling yourself that lie that you think you need to have more sales, and truth is you don't. So if you've heard it, bust it, put it aside, and get started. Myth number 4 is turnover rates is the most important thing I should look at when I'm picking my farm. This is one of those out-of-date practices. This is one of those out-of-date myths that have been passed on and that people continually share. They went to a training session, they hear that turnover rates is the most important thing I should look at. And the reality is turnover rates are important, but it's not the only important thing. And it's definitely not the most important thing when choosing a farm. A lot of old school trainers, that's what they taught you to do. They said, look for something with a good price point and look for something with a good turnover rate and focus on that area. And the truth is, that can be something you use when you're deciding to choose a farm area, but it doesn't have to be the most important thing. I always use the example of my health as an example, like turnover rates. If I look at my blood pressure and judge my overall health based on one metric, that's not a very good snapshot of how my health is. I could have high cholesterol. I could have bad cardio. I could be overweight. I could be not exercising. You have to look at the whole picture when it comes to your farm. Turnover rates is one of those metrics, but it's not the only metric you should be looking at. I know agents who have very small turnover rates and crush it in their farms because they've got a strategy in place. They're doing the right things and they're playing the long-term game. I know agents who are in high turnover rates and are not doing anything because they don't know how to do it correctly. I use the example all the time of a friend of mine who's one of my first coaching clients. He chose an area, and when we sat down and picked his farm, it had a 3.5% turnover rate. And in our area is about 6.5% turnover rate. Now, if he was just basing his farm on turnover rates, like most people tell you to do, he would have skipped over that and missed out on it. Well, I can tell you for the last 4 years, he's been getting 6 figures in his farm every single year consistently, and with very little work, with very little energy. It took some work up front to do it. And he's got a system in place that I help coach him with, and he's making 6 figures every year from this farm that most agents would have skipped over. So turnover rates can be important, but it's not the most important thing. When it comes to turnover rates, though, you need to know what's good and what's bad. You also need to know what's good and bad for your area as a whole. If you live in an area and there's no turnover because no one moves, people aren't coming and going in your area, there's not a lot of home selling, you may just by default have a low turnover rate as a whole. So if you've heard that you need to have a 10% turnover rate or an 8% turnover rate and your area just doesn't even have that, you may not have farmed because you thought turnover rates are the most important thing and you realize that may not be a good fit. Also, you have to look at future trends of what's happening. Is that area turning over? Is it turning into a new, is there like a shift? Like the area that my friend was farming was senior citizens mostly, and they'd been there for 40, 50 years, and they were starting to sell off their homes or moving into retirement homes, and it opened up a whole new wave of people moving to that area. Maybe you have demographic changes, you have psychographic changes, you have financial things happening. So don't just focus on the turnover rate right now as well. And so many people will look at the area and look at the turnover rate in the last 12 months. You have to look at the trends. So is the turnover rate getting higher? Is it getting lower? Is it sustainable to stay at that rate? You may be in an area that just has a high turnover rate as a whole, and that's great. But sometimes you also have to consider what comes with a high turnover rate. You tend to have more competition. Generally, they're lower price point homes. As a result, you're getting more agents trying to go after that business sometimes. So you have to look at the turnover rate organically and holistically to make sure you're getting a bigger snapshot of it. So if you've tried farming before, or if you thought about farming and you looked at turnover rates and that was your sole reason to make a decision, bust that myth. It is not true. It is something to consider, but it's not the only reason why you should or should not choose to farm an area. Myth number 5 is I should promote the heck out of myself. Farming is all about showing off my face. And this myth is so common and so prevalent in this business. And the reality is that the community wants to know you care about them, and you need to bring value to them. It's not about your face. It's not about your name. It's about that community. We talked about the CPR at the beginning. The community comes first. There in our area where I live, in the Toronto area, there's 50,000 agents on our real estate board. 49,900 of them are all branding their name and their face and trying to tell people how great they are and how many homes they sell and how important they are. And they just listed a home or they just sold a home. And the reality is that's the way old school farming has been done, but it doesn't work the way it used to. People are getting tired of seeing that message. People are being drowned out by so many people doing that. There are so many things fighting for our attention and time with social media and online and all these different avenues trying to steal our attention, that we can't be just trying to promote our name and our face. It doesn't work the way it used to. And so many people think that's what they got to do when they do farming, is it's about branding your name and your face. And the reality is it's about the community. And when you shift and you have that mindset shift and you learn to focus on the community first, it becomes so much more easy to get business. It becomes easier to find people that want to work with you. It becomes easy to connect with the community. It becomes easy to get referrals. Because if you put the community first and you give back to them, the community wants to help you and they will want to support you. If anyone's ever watched any of my shows and you've seen some of the interviews I've done, the agents who do incredibly well are the ones who are putting that community first and have that community mindset. And when you change your marketing around the community, you will start to see results come in a lot quicker, a lot easier, a lot less expensively. And just overall, it's more fun and enjoyable to do that. Because agents tend not to be good at marketing, I can tell you that from my years of experience, most agents just copy what everyone else does. And they see every other agent just doing the same thing and they try to copy that. And when it comes to farming, a lot of agents have done the same thing. They just look at what other agents have done or what they've heard them do. And the reality is the agents who are doing it well now in today's society and in our market right now are the ones who are putting the community first, and they make their marketing and their branding about the community. So if you've done that, awesome. If you haven't, if you've thought about farming and you stopped yourself because you thought, I got to promote myself, or if you are farming and not seeing results because you've been trying to promote yourself, you might need to have a mind shift change and bust this myth and realize that promoting yourself can work, but it's not as effective if you don't have the right strategies in place. So you want to have a lot more based around the community than just yourself. So I'm not saying you shouldn't promote yourself, because you absolutely should. And that's one of the things I teach. It's called the scope method, and it's having a well-balanced approach in your business. You need to have self-promotion in there. That's part of it, but you need to have the community. You need to have online, you need to have prospecting in there. You need to have education components to make sure you're reaching people in the best ways possible and the most effectively. So again, if you've thought about farming or you failed at farming and you've done it all about yourself, you may want to rethink things. Myth number 6 is I need to have a lot of market share to be the go-to agent. And this is something we hear all the time, where agents think, well, I've got to have a lot of business in there before people start to see me as that go-to agent. And the reality is you don't need to have as much as you think. And a lot of agents, and I've talked to many, hundreds and hundreds of agents, a lot of times they say, well, there's a big agent in my area. They're already dominating that area. And if you ask them and to do a little more research, they don't usually have as much market share as people think. There are some cases where they absolutely have a large market share, but to become the go-to agent, to become the agent that people see as the person who they should be calling, it doesn't take much market share. Generally, between 5 and 10% market share, people start to see you as that expert. I've studied farming for years and I understand what happens, but what happens is it's the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the business is coming from 20% of those agents. And if you look at the trends, usually you'll see 1 or 2 agents doing a fair amount of deals in the area. Then you see a couple that are doing maybe 3 or 4 deals. Then you see a couple doing 2 deals, and then the rest are doing 1 deal. And what happens is the general public doesn't even see or acknowledge those won deals because they don't remember it. They can't even remember who it is. They don't see who it is. And what happens is you start to get a few deals, people will notice that versus the person who does 1 or 2 deals. And to get mind share, you only need a few deals to get that started. And that 5 to 10% market share can really help elevate that. And if something happens at about that magic 10% mark, you really are seen as that expert. 1 in 10 of the sales in an area are sold by you, and then 8 out of 10 are sold by a bunch of other agents that no one even knows who they are. So what happens is after you hit that 10% mark, you start to get a lot more calls. You start to get a lot more come list me's. You get a lot more a lot less objections because people know that you're farming that area and you're working that area. So again, a lot of agents think that you have to have a lot of business to get a lot of business. And the reality is it doesn't take much to get started. Once you get that momentum going and once you get that growing, you can really turn that into a lot more business if you do it correctly. It's understanding how to get that initial business coming in and then how to leverage that business. And if you learn how to leverage those deals that you get, you can really start to amplify that and see the results. So again, if you've thought about farming and this has stopped you, the reality is you don't need much to start to build that momentum. So contrary to this, a lot of agents think that they can't compete because there's a dominant agent in the area. So they think, well, I need market share to become an agent, or they look at someone else and say, there's already an agent in my area who's crushing it. I can't be that agent because they're already crushing it. The reality is, unless you have that agent has 25% or more market share, there's no reason you shouldn't go after it. And even at 25% market share, I wouldn't be that concerned. Most agents do not have as much market share as you think. And again, going back to that 10% number, we see them the same way as the public sees them, that we see them doing deals and we only notice those deals that are happening because we see them a little more often than the other people. And a lot of times we think that the agent has more market share than they actually have. The good thing is there's a lot more business to get. So even if you had 25%, there's still 3 out of 4 deals left that you could potentially get. If they had 10%, there's 9 out of 10 deals that you could potentially get. If there was an agent that had 50% market share, I may be a little cautious to go in there and try to farm the area if they really have a large market share. But 25% market share or less is absolutely worthwhile to go after if you're willing to do the right things and if you're willing to put the time and energy into it. One of the things that you can do is if there is a dominant agent, it actually works well to your advantage. I recently did an episode with Keith Lucas on my show, and he was talking about, he said he likes going in an area when there is a dominant agent because what you can do is do things differently than an agent. So if they do this, you do that. If they do online, you do offline. If they do open houses, you don't do open houses. So you can change how you do it, or you can match what they do and try to up the level as well. When there's one agent, it's a lot easier to go after and try to get market share when there's one agent. What I would be afraid of, or what I'd be cautious of, is having multiple agents with joint high market shares. That's harder to break into than one agent. So if you've got 5 agents all getting 15% each, that's a lot harder to crack in because they're taking the bulk of those one-off deals that other people were getting, and they're getting more of that market share. So it's harder to compete against 5 agents than it is one. So a lot of times people think, well, there's one agent, I don't want to do that. I'm more worried about the multiple agents. So when you look in your area, I always tell people to look at the top 20%, see who's doing deals. And most times there is only 1 or 2 agents doing a few deals in there, and then it just drops off. If you have agents fighting for a big piece of that pie, multiple pieces of that pie, then I'd be more cautious. Generally, that tends to happen in the higher end price points, in the luxury markets, in the more expensive areas, because there's more people who want that. So they're willing to spend more money, and it's harder to break into. There's an area here where I farmed, which is called the Orchard. And there's an area right beside it, and it's called Millcroft. It was on a golf course. It was higher end homes. It's like 35, 40% more than the other area that I was farming. And if you look in my area, there's only one other agent who had any market share in that area. And that it was a team, and that team just did that much deals across the board. They were doing 400 plus deals a year in our area. So by default, they're going to do that much deals. But if you looked at the Millcroft area, the higher end area, there was a ton of agents doing 5, 6, 7, 8 deals each, trying to fight for that because there's so many agents trying to capture market share because they thought it was worthwhile. So if you're looking at it, don't just look at it as one agent who's a dominant one. Look at multiple agents. That might be more telling of, is it worth it or not if you're making the decision. So if you've not farmed before, again, if you're thinking about it, don't be scared if there's an agent doing some deals in the area. Don't be afraid if there's even a dominant agent, because you can still become that dominant agent. Dominant agents also lose their edge. They lose their market share. There was an agent here in my area. She was doing a little town outside of where I live, and she was doing about 15% of the deals in the area 8 years ago. Each year she was losing 2% market share, and now she has 0.5% market share. So in 8 years, she went from being the number one agent in the area to hardly a blip in the amount of deals that are happening in the area. So watch the trends of those agents as well. Are they going up? Are they going down? That's something you want to take into consideration when you're looking to choose your farm. Maybe there is a dominant agent, but they're losing that market share, or they're gaining it because they're spending more time, more money, and resources. The other thing you want to take into consideration is there a dominant agent because they're farming it? Or are they a dominant agent just because of the volume of business? If it's just the volume of their business they're doing, absolutely it's worth going after. Like I said, there's an agent number of teams here doing 400 or 500 deals a year. They're going to get business in each area regardless because of the volume of business. If they're not actually farming it, they're not really a dominant agent. They're just doing deals in the area. So when you're choosing your farm, make sure you look at that picture as a whole and make the decision correctly. So farming myth number 8 is, once I get traction, then I can back off my marketing efforts because I'm going to start to see the results. The reality is, when you start to get traction, that's when you should be doubling down on things that work, not things that don't work. This is the mistake that a lot of people make, is they spend a lot of money. They see things are working. They either pull back on things or they spend money and just keep spending it. You have to put the time and energy into things that are working. When you get that traction, you want to keep amplifying it. A lot of agents lose their market share because they get comfortable and they don't push harder than what they did. They go, I'm happy with the deals I'm getting. And if that's where you want to be, by all means, that's great. But in order to get true market share and really become that go-to agent, you have to be growing it. It's part of the reason why my business partner and I split up when we had the farm. I wanted to keep doubling down and grow it, and he was happy with the results we were getting. He was making a good living, and he was happy with that. You have to be willing to keep doubling down if you want to keep growing. The other reason why you can't stop is, just like it takes time to get the results, it also takes time to not see the results. So if it takes you 6 months to start seeing results, it could take you 6 months where you think you're doing okay, and the things you're taking away, you don't realize because you don't see the drop right away. And before you know it, you've lost market share. You've lost the edge that you had because it takes time. So for a lot of agents, they get comfortable. They say, well, I don't need to spend that money and I'm not seeing the results exactly the way I wanted to. And then they cut back the time and the energy and the effort and the money. Before you know it, they lost the market share they had. So you have to be always watching, always tracking, always monitoring, and making sure you're spending money and time in the right places and making sure that it's growing. Like I mentioned earlier, that's why I like to start small, so you can kind of use that as your laboratory and test out things, see what's working, what's not working, and then you can scale up. And then once you figure out what's working, then you can double down on that. But if you cut back, you can definitely lose that market share very quickly, or just waste a lot of money and not see the results. So if you are farming right now, or if you've pulled back, make sure you pull back on things that maybe aren't working and not just an assumption. Make sure you're willing to test it and make sure you're willing to spend the money. Once you get that traction, if you really want to be the go-to agent in that area, double down on things that are working and keep growing it and keep hitting it until you get the point of there's a diminishing returns where you're going to not see the results after you keep spending. I always like to try to get as close to that as I can and find out how close can I get to that before I go, okay, I'm not going to get any more business by spending more money on this or more time. Myth number 9 is farming doesn't work in my area. And I absolutely call hogwash on this. First, it depends on what you classify as your area. If you're saying your town, your neighborhood, your community, your country, your state, your city, whatever, farming works. When you understand the fundamentals of farming, which we talked about the CPR at the beginning, that always will work. Strategies may not work. Marketing can work in the area and it can work in any area, but you have to make sure you're doing the right things. The strategies may change. What I do from a strategy perspective may not work in your area, but farming as a whole absolutely will work. If you do it correctly and you're willing to spend the time and the money and the resources and track it and test it, farming will work. what I do for farming might not work in your area. What someone else does for farming might not work. And we hear this myth because people have seen what other people have done and say, well, that's farming, or that doesn't work in my area, or they're not willing to do it, or they're not willing to do it correctly. And then people say, well, it won't work. Farming will always work, and it can work. It may not be as efficient for you as it is for me, or if you're not doing it correctly, you may not see the results that I get. But farming will absolutely work in your area if you're willing to put the time and the energy to try it, test it, and do it. Myth number 10 is I should farm a bigger area. That way I won't miss out on my business. This is something that agents do all the time. This is one of the biggest causes of failure in farming is agents trying to farm an area too big, taking on too much because they think, well, if I do that, I don't want to miss out. So I'm going to go bigger. Then I can have more market share and more deals and more business. And the reality is, as I mentioned earlier, it's better to scale up than it is to scale back. If you've never farmed before, if you don't know what you're doing in farming and you do a large push to try to farm your area and you suck at it and it's wrong, you're spending more money on things that are wrong. You're spending more money telling people that you don't know what you're doing. You're spending more money on strategies that you haven't tested and haven't even seen if they work or not. The reality is starting small allows you to concentrate your money, concentrate your efforts, test what you're working on, and then you can scale up. So if you've got 5,000 homes in your area, that's great, but maybe you start with 1,000 homes and see what works, and then you can scale up. The other reason why we want to do it is to make sure we're balancing our budget and making sure we're reinvesting our time. So many agents, they do what I call try farming, and that is not farming at all. Just because you sent out a postcard to a geographic area is not farming. That's called failed marketing. If you've tried farming because you sent out something for a couple months, that's not farming. You have to be willing to put the time and the energy and the effort into it to make sure you get the results. And if you do it too big, you'll blow through your money if you haven't tested it. So I want to see you start smaller and scale up. If you've done it before, you've got the experience, you know it works, then that's fine, but you have to be willing to commit in the long run. Don't do a big area and say, well, I've got the budget for 2 months or 3 months. You're not going to see the results. Pick a smaller area and spend the budget for a year or 2 years and have it set aside to do that. I always share the story. My friend Adam, when he started his farm, I was helping him pick his area, and the area had 280 homes in this little area. And there was a big highway that came through a number of years ago and cut off this section of town. It was just this little triangle pocket that cut through. And what happened is he decided to pick this area because he knew the area. He grew up in there. He knew people in the area. And he said, I want to spend $100 a month for a year, that if I lost that money, it would be okay if I lost it. My wife's not going to kill me. I'd be okay with it. And I'm going to test it out. So he quickly became that expert in the area. He did a lot of the strategies I taught him, where he branded the neighborhood and became the ambassador for the area. And in that but within his first almost full year, he did 8 out of the 11 transactions in that neighborhood that sold. He crushed it. He did incredibly well with that and became the go-to person. He did more business from 280 homes than I've seen a lot of agents do out of 5,000 homes, because he was focused. He built the attention. He built the relationships. He was the ambassador. He was the expert. He followed the CPR model without even understanding what that was, and he became the go-to agent. So you don't have to have a lot of deals to become that agent. You can start with a lot of homes to become that go-to agent. It takes time to do that, though, and it takes effort and energy. So you have to be willing to do that. If you go too big, you can absolutely lose your shirt. You can lose your business. You can lose momentum. So don't start too big. That's one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you. So hopefully I busted that myth. If you thought about farming, if you're currently trying farming, scale back, double down on what you're doing in a smaller area than half-assing as much in a bigger area. I'm going to throw in a farming myth bonus. I need to figure farming out on my own. And the truth is, absolutely, you can figure out farming on your own, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of agents try to figure out farming on their own, and then you see the results. And I've talked to more agents that have failed at farming than have succeeded at farming. And a lot of that comes back to these myths. A lot of that comes back to that fear and that misinformation and lack of experience and lack of training, because people don't know what to do and they're not sure how to do it. They either try it on their own, or they just watch what someone else did without really understanding what they did or why they did it, or seeing what's behind the scenes, and they don't understand farming. And I've seen more agents fail because they've tried it than agents who've succeeded because they don't understand it. So you can get help. Obviously, that's what I do. doesn't have to be me that you need to get help with, but if you're going to try farming and figure it out, you need to be willing to learn and to be committing to figuring it out. Absolutely, you can go out on your own, just like working out. You can go to a gym and try to figure out the machines and try to figure out how to get healthy yourself. But having someone help you with that will help speed up that process. So if you've thought about farming and you're trying to do it on your own, by all means, but I would look for support, resources, and materials that will help you speed up the process. It will be well worth it in the long run. So what's next? If you want to get more information, you want to get some support and some help, I've got, as I mentioned, I have my show. So you can go to my site, launchyourfarm.com. On the show, I have my interviews. I have a weekly interview show. You can check that out. It's a podcast and a video show. You can find it on all major podcast platforms, Apple, iTunes, and all that stuff. You can find it there. You can find the video on YouTube as well, on YouTube as well. I do a weekly blog as well. So I dump my brain each week, pick a topic of something that's on my mind or something I've seen that's coming up with a lot of agents that I'm coaching and training, and I share that. So I share tips and tricks and strategies you can use to help grow your farm. So if you want to get some help that way, you can do that. Access to my courses are on there as well, and there's some other great information as well. If you want, you can connect with me on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at Launch Your Farm. I'm very easy to find. If you don't find me, I didn't do my job. So if you search Launch Your Farm, you should find me. You can find me on my website and email me as well. The other thing is I have 2 programs if you're interested. Oops, I forgot to update that. The next session is September 9th, not July 8th. That was the one we just started. So we launch a boot camp about every 2 months, and it's 8 live Zoom calls every week for 8 weeks. And we dive into a bunch of strategies. We share how you can actually go implement these things into your farm, and how we give you tools, resources, scripts, and we take the scope method that I talked about, and we really dive into creating a balance in your business. And you end up with a ton of ideas and ton of strategies you can use, and then you can choose which ones you want to implement into your business, which one are going to be good for it. It's not, a lot of these are good for not just farming. They will apply to your business as a whole, but layered into a farm, you will start to see results. And a lot of agents that have gone through the program have seen very, as I mentioned, quick results, and who are willing to put the time in and do it. You can really grow your farm well. I designed this during COVID, so it's COVID friendly, it's cost friendly, so there's not a lot of expenses to doing these strategies. If you want to spend a bit more money, you can amplify things. So that starts September 9th. That's $4.99 Canadian. So if you're American, it's even cheaper because of the exchange rate. And you can find that at thefarmbootcamp.com. Also, if you've never farmed before, if you're looking to start a farm, I have a 30-day launch program. So it's 30 videos over 30 days. And we do a video per day with homework each day. And it's meant to get you into action. It's meant to get you taking steps to actually go out and choose your farm. So the first week is doing all the research. So you select your farm, then we go into marketing, we go into value adds, pulling it all together. So you've got a system in place to get yourself launched. And that's video self-guided because it goes through each day. And that's $199, and that's thefarmlaunch.com. So you can find that there as well. There's also, you're going to get a copy of the scope calendar, so you can get that. So just stick around and I'll show you how to get that. I designed, as I mentioned, the scope explains more about what scope is about, and it's designed to help you lay out your year, your month, your week, and your day on what you should be doing to enhance your methods, and taking that scope method into account. How do you lay out your year and stay accountable? It's beta testing. I'm just creating this, my first run at this. So please critique it. Let me know what you think. If you like it, if you don't like it, what changes you'd add to it. So you'll get a copy of that in a second. Also, you can get a copy of my free report. It's 5 strategies to grow your geographic farm. So I go through the scope method and I share a strategy for each one of the scope methods and how you can use that to actually go out and actually implement these strategies in your farm. So you get a copy of the planning calendar, the report. You'll also get 20% off the boot camp and 20% off the 30-day launch program if you choose to. And then you'll get my weekly newsletter, which is priceless in my opinion. You're going to get that tips and strategies and strategies and tactics as well. So you get that sent to your inbox once a week as well. So you can find that at launchyourfarm.com/NLA. So that's launchyourfarm.com/NLA. So if you do sign up for it, just check your junk mail because it may show up there on the first thing when you sign up. So I'll wrap up with my final thoughts, and then we'll get to some questions and answers. So 3 things you must do to succeed in farming. And really, you must do to succeed in all real estate or all life, really. But the first thing is you need to learn. You have to be willing to learn. The great thing about this business is, at least what I love about it, is it never stops, and you never stop learning. You should never stop learning. If you've stopped learning and you're not committed to learning, you might as well quit the business, because again, rules change, things change, strategies changes, technology changes. We always should be learning and be willing to stay on top of things and continually learn. If you aren't willing to do that, find somewhere where you can just do the same thing over and over and over again, because if you're not willing to learn, what's the point? Real estate allows us to continually learn, which is great for the people like myself who like to learn, but you have to be willing to do that. The next is that you have to commit. Just like anything, if you're not committed to doing it, you are not going to see the results. If you're not committed to farming, you are not going to see the results. If you try farming, if you dabble in farming, you will fail. The odds are stacked against you dramatically. If you try it, you will not see results. You have to be committed to what it takes to get the results. You have to be committed to the time it takes to get the results. You have to be committed to stepping out of your comfort zone at times. And if you're willing to do that and you're committed to that, you can see the results. And I've seen more agents look at other agents who are succeeding going, how do they do that? Why do they do it? How come I couldn't do that? And the biggest reason was commitment. And if you aren't committed to doing that, then just walk away. If you're committed and you're serious and you want to grow your farm and grow your business, then you can succeed if you are willing to learn and to do that. And then lastly, you need to start. If you are not willing to start and actually take action on it, I don't care how committed you are, you have to start to see the results. Just like a real farm. If I don't plant that seed, I will not see the results. If I don't plant that seed, I will not have a crop in 6 months or a year, or however long it's going to take you. And in real estate, every day that it takes that you delay doing that is another day that you delay getting the results. I've talked to a ton of agents and I follow up with a lot of them and they say, oh, last year they told me they were going to start farming this year and next year, oh, they're not ready yet, next year and maybe next year. Every day that you take to start is another day that it's going to take to see those results. So if you're willing to learn, if you're willing to commit to do what it takes and you're willing to start, you will succeed. Now, one thing I always suggest, and not many people take me up on this, but write out what you want to do. Write out one step you're going to take in the next 40 hours and tell someone about it. And then take action on it. Tell your friend, tell your spouse, tell your kids, tell your boss, tell me. If you want, you can email it to me at launchyourfarm@gmail.com. Shoot me an email and tell me what you're going to do. Statistically, we know if you do not take action on and write it out and tell someone about it, the odds of you actually going and doing it are very little. So if you are serious and you want to take action, you want to get going, tell someone and take action on it. So with that, I will open up to questions. Hopefully I've busted some of those myths. Hopefully I've answered some of the questions, but was there any things that have came up that you didn't get answered? Some things you wanted to get clarity on? Was there any questions you had at all? Jump on and unmute yourself or throw it in the chat and we'll answer the questions. Anybody? Just make sure you unmute yourself. I'm here. Answer the questions if you got them. Throw them in the chat if you don't want to jump on the microphone. All right. Seems like no one has any questions. So hopefully I answered your questions. Again, if you have any questions or want to reach out, feel free. You can connect with me online. As I mentioned, you can get those resources at launchyourfarm.com/NLA. You can get a copy of the report and the guide and get the discounts as well. Check out my show, check out my videos if you want. It's a great way to get started. So if you have any questions or anything, I will sign off. Other than that, thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate it and happy farming.